Hello and welcome to that tutorial about flexible designs with splitters. If you haven't done so, please have a look at my first tutorial about splitters for photo collages. What I have shown there basically was, what we can see here as well, how to create from a bunch of images a very versatile and flexible layout where the buyer can upload their images. So let's have a look at this again. I select an image, I select 3 sample images to upload, and still the buyer is able to very easily make their own layout. They can even reduce it to one image or split it again, all that stuff. The layout we are looking at is more like a kind of an old iPod player design, and it's quite nice because I can actually celebrate my relationship. And so we got the soulmate headline, we got Leah and Louis here, and of course everything of this is changeable. So we can change the text here, we can change the names, of course we can change the title, and we can change the band. That's pretty nice. The problem now comes if I want to offer this design on several products. Let's say, for example, canvas products where I get all the different aspect ratios from portrait to landscape and everything in between. So this design here is created as a layout snippet, which we see here is a layout lib. And if we go to layout snippet, it has enabled the filter by aspect range. There's another very nice and interesting videos about how to deal with layouts variants, but even if you just do a single layout, you can tell Printess for which aspect ratio this layout is appropriate for. So in that case, we have selected all the range from not super portrait, but from portrait to landscape in an extreme form as well. So when we go over to the buyer side, we see this little control on top here where we can test drive our layout changes. So if I go to square, it looks pretty good. If I go to landscape, it still looks surprisingly good. And even in ultra landscape, it looks okay. But if I go to some super portrait format, I run into the problem that these layouts are actually just melting together. And if we look carefully, we will even observe that some of the distances are different in some of the other layout scenarios. So what can we do? Actually, the problem which occurs here is these frames are just placed like absolute position frames, so they keep their position. And even if there are layout snippets and there are scale with the design, they will not keep that whole system idea of this is my headline part, that's my bottom line part. Another problem which occurs is that we want to keep these things together. So soulmate and the subline as well as the player in itself should be treated like an image. It should always have the same parts fit together. So when we go now, and let me just do this here with the player, and select all that frames and we group them, then we run into the problem. If this frame got smaller, it actually, as you see here, the images get squeezed, they're not fitting completely into their frames. Even if I do more crazy resizing, I will see that these elements are actually fall out of shape. So what we can do instead of using that grouping, we can do, and I press Ctrl Z again, so I pressed 3 times Ctrl Z to come to where we were, so lots of single frames here. And if I select them again, I can actually group them as a subdocument, which is pretty handy. You don't even see another subdocument, even Printess has created one in the background. And whenever you click on this frame, you now can actually open that group or / subdocument. You can even double click on the frame. And so if you want to later on do some changes, have missed something, change colors, whatever, you still can do. But on the top level document, this is now one frame, which is extremely handy because if I'm changing that frame to any dimension, it will keep our player controls in shape. So they behave now like an image. You can scale them. They behave like an image because you can even say if they're actually should be in the bottom or top, if they fit or fill. All these settings is pretty much like an image, but we're using that kind of subdocument group here to do that. So that's pretty nice. Let's do that as well with the headline. So let me select the both frames here, like this frame and this frame, and group them in a subdocument as well. So now we have only 5 frames on that page: the headline, the player, and the 3 images. And if we go now and do something crazy and say they should be a splitter, and for that frame they should be a splitter as well. So now go to the buyer side, and these are now all splitter frames. But since they have a rather big distance here, they are not automatically one splitter group. And since this is a text frame, it actually doesn't show you the scissor tools, because it would not make any sense to cut a text frame in half and then have 2 times the same text frame. So therefore, we still have the ability here for the images, but we don't have them here. And since the gap is rather big, it will not treat it as one splitter unit. So we can actually only change our center part here, which is pretty what we want. And we can actually go to that frames. And now, since they are grouped, we see all the properties together here, which in most cases is even easier for the user to work with. We can change the color, we can change the song and the band, all that. But the good news is now, as we already see, this behaves pretty well on that extreme layout here. And it behaves pretty well on all the other layouts. So let me go through the layouts, and you will see that these frames are all stick together. Thanks to the splitter activated here, the whole proportion, the whole idea of the layout still sticks, even if the aspect ratio is totally different than what was intended in the first place. And here we see that we can't resize this layout. It gives us an error for the landscape, which didn't look good in the first place, by the way, because the frame would just go too small. And whenever a frame goes too small in a splitter layout, Printess gives this warning. So what we should do is we could say, oh, we don't want this design for the super landscape mode, or we can actually make the frames bigger. But first of all, this is the first part. I wanted to show you how simple it is to use splitter here, and just use text frames as splitter frames, and keep the layout without any logic and complex layout building. If we want to make this frame bigger, we are free to do so. We can just do it like this, and we do it like this. And since this is a frame where the content always is in the middle, it looks pretty good. We don't even have to change the size of the subdocument. Still, if we want, we could do so. We can still go in here and make this thing bigger, if that makes sense. So you're flexible to do that. So let me go to the player, make it bigger as well, and maybe just dock it here to the splitter. And the same thing like with the images happens, it will just be part of that huge splitter layout. So if we select all frames or click select grid here, we can now even fine-tune this layout. If we go to the buyer side, now it's all one layout. So we have a gripper here on top, so we can even make this image smaller or the headline smaller until a certain degree where it vanishes, which maybe not really intended, but anyhow, it's splitter, so it can do that. And the same thing happens also here. So again, all that is now still pretty flexible. So it says we can't resize, but if I make this bigger, I am able to resize this to an ultra landscape format. If I go back here to the portrait as well, I can do some fine adjustments if I don't like the layout. So, and I want to just change that a little bit. In that case, we could even go and say, hey, that would be maybe totally makes sense to just put the focal point for the headline to the top and for the player to the bottom. And then we even got more flexibility, because now we can actually maintain a gap to our of our core part with the image collage and actually have all that gap. And if we want to have more gap, we get it, but our player still sticks in the bottom. Yeah, that was all about. I want to show you firsthand here. So the take-home message is splitters are not limited to images. They could be text frames, they could be shapes, they could be subdocuments. They always have to be one frame. So in a splitter, only a single frame can live. So if we have 5 frames in our splitter, we have 5 frames in the layer palette here. That's important to remember, but that's not a limitation at all, because if you have 2, you simply group them into a subdocument. Thanks very much for watching. Have fun with splitters. I can tell you, you can do a lot of things with it in a very easy fashion. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.